Oh, this is the wrong thing. Good evening. Some of you may have heard about the Russian elections that took place yesterday. It may surprise you that Vladimir Putin has unexpectedly won a landslide with 76.6, and I understood tonight almost 770, thus far the population. It was actually Rabbi Lazar's joke, not mine. Today, Russia is a major player in the international arena with important ramifications for us in the Middle East. But this is not the point of my introduction. My introduction is for Rabbi Berel Lazar. You see, in many ways, this evening is very special for me. I was not only born in Russia, to parents who never thought that Jewish life may not be possible in what was once the Soviet Union, but I also returned to Russia, newly married with 2 babies, a young wife, into a country that everyone told me not to go to, as nothing would be possible. Everything was dead. Perhaps except the bears in the forest, but at that time, even they didn't have any vodka. And so I came back to Russia to see what, if anything, would be possible. It was supposed to be a contract for a year, and then it turned into 2, and then 3, and then almost 13 years. Thank God we were involved in many projects, launched new initiatives, and saw a renaissance in Jewish life. But the truth is that throughout my years in Russia, perhaps what I learned most is that it's not the potential projects or the amount of money, funding, or another meeting that can make an idea better. The key to success are people, leadership, dedication, and passion for what one does. Perhaps little sleep, a lot of needed blessing, a bissel l'chaim, but it is all about the people. I think there's no better way for me to describe the approach that Rabbi Lazar takes in his work. A religious leader, a diplomat, father, and a friend, Rabbi Lazar has approached his work in a way that focuses on one person at a time. But leaders cannot lead without communities and those who share their dreams. We are extremely fortunate that together with Rabbi Lazar here tonight, a very close friend who has supported our work both in the former Soviet Union and who continues to support educational programs and activities here in Israel is also here. If you would allow me, I would like to take this opportunity to present Mr. Vadim or David Aminov with a recognition for his contribution to Jewish education and Jewish life in Russia and here in Israel. Vadim.
Good evening. I'm very sorry, but for me it's more easy to speak Russian, and my friend David Rozenson very kindly to help for me. Добрый вечер. Очень приятно, что многие понимают меня. И, безусловно, сегодня очень важный день для меня, прежде всего, что я хочу сказать спасибо за ту благодарность, которую мне сегодня высказали. Вот, для меня это в первую очередь большой аванс для дальнейшей работы.
He would like to thank everybody here tonight, and also the recognition that's being given to him. And of course, it's an extra strength for my future work. It's a loose translation. It's not. I'll make it up.
Знаете, я сегодня в Иерусалим приехал, не зная, что мне дадут такое признание. Вот, я приехал сюда с вопросами. И у нас была встреча с уважаемым Дэвидом Розенсоном и с основателями этого фонда, в котором Авихай мы сегодня находимся, и с Артуром Фридом, и с Мэм.
You know, I came here today without knowing that I would receive any sort of recognition, and I had the good fortune earlier today to meet with the leadership of the Avichai Foundation, and I came to them with questions.
Один из вопросов, который у меня сегодня был, по поводу моих детей, по поводу того, как можно и как нужно воспитывать в детях уже сегодня такое важное еврейское качество, как способность делиться.
And one of the questions that I asked is about my children. How could I educate? One of the questions that I came here with today is about my children. How could I educate my children to also continue to give to others?
Безусловно, такие интересные и очень много лет жизни отдавшие еврейскому образованию и воспитанию люди, как Артур и Мэм, мне кажется, дали мне очень важный совет.
And the heads of the foundation who are involved in Jewish education and spend so much energy and effort to try to promote Jewish education, I think gave me a very important response, a very important answer.
Он состоял из двух частей. Первая часть этого совета была, безусловно, в том, что с детьми нужно быть очень открытым, нужно обсуждать все вещи, которые только есть на столе, нужно все дела свои с ними обсуждать, вместе рассказывая им, чем мы занимаемся вне дома.
Of course, the first part of the response is about the openness that we have to have with our children, the time that we spent with them, the time around the table, speaking to them openly about various issues.
А вторая часть этого совета была в том, что делиться с людьми это не какая-то странность, а что это заложено в основе каждого еврея. И ответ на вопрос, почему мы делимся, он стоит в том, потому что мы евреи.
But the second part of the answer is because we as Jews, it's something that's already within us. Sharing is the definition of what being Jewish is about.
Поэтому, безусловно, все, что мы делаем, и каждый из нас в меру своих сил, это потому, что мы евреи. И мы делимся с другими, мы что-то делаем для нужд еврейского образования в такой прекрасной стране, как Россия, и делая лучше другим, ты, безусловно, делаешь лучше себе. Потому что это, безусловно, защита от того, что существует плохого в этом мире. Как только ты начинаешь больше думать о других людях, то это делает тебя немного лучше.
And the reason that we give to others is because we're Jewish. That's a definition of what being Jewish is. And a country like Russia, and certainly in a country like Israel, giving to others is really doing something for ourselves. It's a way to protect ourselves.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. Okay, and now without further ado, I think what we'll have is Rabbi Lazar will give an introduction for 10 minutes, and then afterwards, we also have the good fortune that Steve Linde, the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Report, will interview Rabbi Lazar. After that, the floor, that'll be for around 40 minutes, and then we'll have around 15 to 20 minutes, maybe less, for questions. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good evening. I hate to disagree with Dr. David Rozenson, but I'll be shorter than 10 minutes. Just in continuation to the topic that we just spoke now, we heard about giving, sharing. We're just all preparing for Pesach, and we all know that the beginning of the Seder, all of a sudden, out of the blue, we turn to the Agod and we start reading and we say, Kol dichfin yeiteh ve'yechol. Whoever is in need, whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Let him come and celebrate Pesach with us. Why all of a sudden on Pesach we make such a statement? Why don't we say this every Shabbat, every holiday, maybe every day? As the Rambam says, somebody that thinks happiness comes only from eating, it's a happiness of his stomach. It's not a happiness of a mitzvah. Real happiness is when you share with others. As was just mentioned, that this makes us happier, better. So how can we say this on Pesach? And I was thinking that probably it's connected to the history of Pesach. When we remember where we were and where we are today, sitting in Jerusalem, preparing for Pesach, and Baruch Hashem, we see the success of Israel in every form and way. It's really a time to think of others, thinking of how we could help others feel as good as we feel and share with them the miracle of Pesach. Pesach is about Yeiteh ve'ifsach, let him come and join Pesach with us. Pesach is about jumping. Each one of us can make a leap of faith, can jump ahead and feel something special that this Pesach is going to give to us. And as I just mentioned before, for Russian Jews, Pesach is their holiday, because they themselves felt that they were in slavery or through hardships, and today, Baruch Hashem, what we see is a miracle. Just to give you some small numbers, we just finished preparing over 200 tons of matzah, which will be distributed throughout Russia. Plus, we bring in containers from Israel of special matzah prepared here. We're going to have Sedarim in over 200 cities in Russia with over 40,000 people participating. Actually, David Rozenson's son is going to be running one of the Sedarim in a remote city somewhere in Russia. So this is really the miracle today of opening our doors to everybody else that still didn't have a chance to celebrate his Jewishness and make him feel that he could also leave Egypt, leave the fear that was in the past, and feel the real freedom. So Baruch Hashem, today we are here celebrating our freedom, and let's hope that together we will be able to send this message and share this message with many, many others. So Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a kosher and happy Pesach, and I think we'll start the show.
Chief Rabbi Berel Lazar, Baruch haba, welcome to all of you. We hope you enjoy this evening. I'll try not to be too long to allow you to ask your own questions. Please be aware that this evening is being live streamed, so we are being watched. Chief Rabbi Lazar, after your introductory...
I just want to say welcome to Russia. We're being watched.
Speaking about Russia, we were talking earlier and you were telling me, and it surprised me, about how good it is to be Jewish in Russia today, because it never used to be like that. Can you share that with our audience?
Actually, I remember that was 18 years ago when President Putin came to the opening of the synagogue. That was the first of a Russian president participating in any kind of Jewish activity or event. And I remember a few months later, an old lady came over to me and she said, "Can you believe I'm able to walk in the streets with my head up?" And she said, "My whole life," and she said, "over 7 years, whenever I walk in the streets, I had my head down." And all of a sudden I realized, if the president could come to opening of a synagogue, I can be proud of being Jewish. This was a unique situation because old people rarely change their views, or their attitude. But actually what we see today in Russia, we see a new generation. If you count, today we have 25, 30-year-old boys and girls who actually were born already in freedom. Were born not under communism. Were born in a country that in the past made Jews feel uncomfortable, scared, ashamed of who they are. I mean, you all know that in Russia, in the passport, they used to have what is called the Pyata Grafa, the fifth point. There was the nationality, and the Jew had to have the name Jewish in it. And people did whatever they can to change this point and turn themselves into Russians. And today, the same people are coming back and they're saying, we want to change it again and show that we are Jewish. So you have today young people that actually were born in a new country with a new attitude, and they feel proud of being Jewish. They walk around in the street with a Magen David. They'll walk around the street with a kippah, not because they're religious, just because they want to show who they are. They're proud of being Jewish.
How many Jews are there in Russia today?
That's the million-dollar question. The truth is, whenever people ask us this question, we say, we don't know how many there are, because you're talking about 70, 80 years of assimilation, 70, 80 years of fear of being Jewish, so people did whatever they can to hide their Jewishness. And as I mentioned before, they would change their birth certificate, they would not tell their children who they are. Today, many people are actually all of a sudden finding out that their ancestors were Jewish. But nevertheless, many, many of them remain Jewish. And the real question is, how many Jews know that they're Jewish? There was just a study made by the Levada Center, a famous poll company, and they claim that there's 1.5 million Jews. We don't know if that's an exact number, not exact number. Our job is really to find these Jews, to make them realize that even though you just heard that your grandmother was Jewish, that makes you Jewish. I'll just tell you a small story. And on Hanukkah, I visited a prison. And I'm here today, so I'm fine. And actually, today we have 11 prayer rooms in different prisons throughout Russia. So this was actually the oldest prison in Russia, Butyrkaya, and there is sadly around 25, 30 people in this jail, right now Jews, and we had a special Hanukkah event. So I came there, I visited, and because I was visiting, so the deputy chief of all the jails in Moscow came to greet me. And this lady comes over to me and she says, we're so happy, so honored that you came to visit these prisoners. It's something unlikely to see such an important figure coming just to prisoners. I said, listen, these are the most important members of our community. And we care for them and we want to help them. And actually I told her, it's Hanukkah, it's a special time. We want to give them a feeling of optimism and hope for the future. And I started sharing with her the message of Hanukkah. I said, actually, the message of Hanukkah is something universal. It's not about Jews. It's about lighting a candle, and by lighting the candle, very often we see a different light, and our fears and our concerns just go away. And at a certain point, she tells me, actually, I also have a connection. I say, what do you mean you also have a connection with? So she says, because my grandmother was Jewish. So I say, which grandmother? She says, my mother's mother. I said, well, I want to let you know that you are as Jewish as I am. She almost fell. And she couldn't believe it. She said, are you telling me that I'm Jewish? I said, of course, you are as Jewish as any other Jew. You have to understand that in Russia, if your father is Jewish, you're Jewish. If your father is not, you're not. Feminism doesn't really work too well in Russia, as you probably know. So anyways, this lady was shocked. Of course, I gave her a Hanukkah menorah. I told her, listen, you should light this menorah in your home. You should start coming to the synagogue. It's yours as much as it's ours. Anyway, the event took place. She already had left. And right before leaving the jail, I get a message from one of the guards that the head of the jail wants to see me. So I thought, I hope I didn't do any trouble. I hope everything is okay. Anyways, I come into his office, he locks the door, and he tells me, Rabbi, I heard you telling this lady that if her grandmother was Jewish, she's also Jewish. Well, my grandmother, her name was Maria Abramovna. My great-uncle, his name was Isaac, and they were all Jewish. I just found out that I'm also Jewish. And there was a young man with me when I was visiting the jail. He turns to me and says, did we come to jail or did we come to shul? So this is really the story in Russia. There's so many Jews out there which we don't know about. And our goal is really, as I always say, I'll just say it in 2 words, to make them feel happy of being Jewish. This was when I first came to Russia, I realized Russian Jews suffered because of their Judaism. Their whole life, they were beaten. They didn't come into an university because they were Jewish. They didn't get a good job because they were Jewish. You know, there's a famous joke. There's somebody, well, I'll tell you the jokes later.
Tell us now.
Somebody goes for a job interview and they check everything and looks great. And then they ask him, tell us, what's your name? He says, Rabinovich, but I'm not Jewish. He says, with such a name, we might as well take a Jew. So the point is that actually Jews suffered for centuries in Russia. It's not only communism, it's before pogroms and everything. And all of us, and our job really is to give them back some dignity, to make them feel happy that they're Jewish.
Chief Rabbi, you started, even though you were born in Milan, Italy, and you got your smicha and you studied in New York, which explains your great English. You became Chief Rabbi in 1990, so it's been almost three decades. And during that time, you've established a good relationship with President Putin, who, as David said, has now been elected for a 4th term, a landslide with, I think, almost 77% of the vote. How would you describe your relationship with Putin, and do you think another 6 years of Putin is good for the Jews?
I'm not a prophet, so I don't know what Russia is going to look like in 6 years from now. We do hope and pray that it's going to get just better and better. I think that if you want to describe who Putin is, I think he's a very brave person. I would even say that he's fearless. Where do I see it? Because he was the first one that decided to give Jews some kind of recognition. He was the first one that started fighting anti-Semitism. As much as we loved Yeltsin and we had a good relationship with him and with Gorbachev, whenever an issue of anti-Semitism came up, they said taboo. Please don't mention it. Please don't talk about it. Of course, it wouldn't show up at a Jewish event. It wasn't popular. It wouldn't have helped them, and probably, people thought it wouldn't even help the Jews. Why stir up and make an issue out of it? Putin was the first one that actually came out and said, the Jews belong in this country as any other nationality, any other religion. So if you ask me what is the relationship, I think he's very open-minded about different nationalities, different people, Jews, non-Jews living in Russia. And therefore, he has a connection with the leader of the Orthodox Church, with the Muslim community, with the Buddhist community, and with the Jewish community. Happens to be that in Russia, religion plays a big part of society. It's an important issue. And therefore, I think that that's his connection probably with the Jewish community.
How do you explain, though, his close connection with you, the Jewish community, and with Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu, with whom he's also established a very good relationship?
When you asked the first part of the question, I wanted to say probably likes my beard, but doesn't work with Netanyahu, so we'll have to figure out a different answer. Actually, I could tell you about Netanyahu. About myself, it's very hard for me to tell. I always try to guess, like, how did I end up in such a position, and is it really me, or it's... and then I look at the mirror, and I say, probably not. But when I think of Netanyahu, actually, I remember the first time they met. It was a Hanukkah event in the synagogue, And as we say, Ashgacha Pratit, we invited President Putin, and a few days later, we heard that Bibi Netanyahu is in town. So we told Bibi, actually, if you come to the synagogue on Hanukkah, I don't know if you do that in Israel every time, but if you'll come on Hanukkah, you might meet somebody interesting. And Bibi and Putin met, Netanyahu and Putin met actually at the synagogue. Later they went into a room and they had a long discussion. It was actually my office for close to 2 hours. And that was the beginning of a relationship that has been going on already for 18 years. So I think that, let me tell you, number one, Putin loves Israel. And I heard this from him before he got to know Netanyahu. He came here, he was invited to Israel when he was deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, at that time Leningrad. He visited the country. He came back home and he told his wife, we are taking a trip to Israel. I want our kids to see how people were able to turn the desert into a land of milk and honey. And he said he took his family and traveled Israel from north to south, from Matula till Beersheba, till Eilat. He really went and saw everything. And he was really impressed for what he saw. And he says, it's something that we can learn from. That's number one. Number two, you have over 1 million Russian-speaking Jews living in Israel. That's a very strong connection with Russia. He feels that this is a strong bridge that can help. Number three, I think Israel has been a good friend to Russia. If you look today, what's going on in the world, sanctions and all of that, Israel has shown that, you know, their friendship is strong, and I think that that was an important message. I also think he realizes that mistakes that were made through the Soviet regime, you know, to stand up and help the Arab countries against Israel was a political mistake and doesn't make any sense. So I think adding up all these points, plus I think he likes strong leaders. I think Bibi is one of them. And but he has liked Sharon, and he loved Peres. I remember many different events when we were sitting together, and he really, I think he has shown to many countries that if you are friendly with Russia, Russia will be friendly with you. And Israel was able to show that.
I accept what you say, Chief Rabbi, and yet it worries us here in Israel that we also see Putin supporting Assad in Syria and the Iranian regime, and we wonder how things actually work in reality. How can you support both sides of a conflict? And especially the situation in Syria, which is so tragic, and Russia has such a key role in the region. Do you see it as positive or a negative thing that he seems to be playing both sides?
So I'm not so well versed in everything that's going on in Syria. I know a few things that I can mention here. Number one, there's practically a daily briefing coming from Russia to Israel, Israel to Russia, about what's going on in Syria. The defense minister in Russia has been in touch with Israel on many, many different issues. And Putin does believe, and he said this many different times at different events, even in the community, that Syria with Assad right now is better for Israel than Syria without Assad. I'll just give you an example. I don't know how many of you know, one of the oldest Jewish communities is actually in Aleppo and in Damascus. There are buildings there that date back of the times of David HaMelech. There's a synagogue, there was a synagogue where Eliyahu Navi met Elisha. There's a synagogue that Yoav, the minister of defense of King David, built in Aleppo. When the terrorists came in, and they were powerful in Syria, they destroyed all these synagogues. Today, Russia is helping to safeguard these places and help with the Jewish cemetery there. And as Putin says, right now, Syria needs a leader to stop these terrorists. What's going to happen tomorrow once we're going to get rid of the terrorists? Let's sit down and talk. And he thinks that losing Assad and having the country in the hand of terrorists, IGIL and Daesh, is going to be much worse for Israel. Do we agree? Don't we agree? It's a big question. Iran's infiltrating Syria is another big question. I'll tell you, in private meetings, I do discuss this with him. I get answers. I can't say that always the answers are, what we would like to hear, but I do feel that he has Israel interests when he decides how to deal with Syria.
Thank you. I'd like to get back to the Jewish community in Russia because it fascinates me how you think it's cool to be Jewish in Russia today. I know that as part of your job as chief rabbi, you travel over the whole country. You recently visited Siberia, where there's a Jewish community, and you're even going to open next month a Jewish university in Moscow. Tell us more about that.
About Siberia?
And the
Siberia is a drop colder than Yerushalayim, just a drop. When we were there, it was 45 degrees below zero. So it's just a little cold. Actually, it's amazing to see, number one, how these communities survived communism. You mentioned the visit to Siberia. We actually were in a city called Tomsk. It's one of the cities that David loves from his earlier work in Russia. In Tomsk, there is a synagogue that was built by the Cantonists. These were soldiers. They were drafted in the army when they were little kids, 8, 9, 10 years old, served in the army 25 to 40 years. And these soldiers, Jewish soldiers, after coming back from serving in the army, they wanted to remain Jewish, which wasn't easy. They were beaten and it suffered throughout the whole service in the army because of the Jewishness. But when they came back, in this case to Tomsk, they went into the synagogue and the local community said, "You're not wanted. You're not Jewish enough for us." So they went and they built their own synagogue. It was a wooden synagogue. Today the synagogue was given back to the Jewish community. It was a really special event. It was also special because all of a sudden a Jew came to the event carrying a bundle, and all of a sudden he opened it up and it was a Sefer Torah that his grandfather had saved when the synagogue was closed 80 years ago. And he returned it on that day to the synagogue. So you're talking about, again, 3 generations of Jews hiding their Jewishness, and all of a sudden you see this grandson carrying this Torah back to the synagogue when nobody ever believed that a synagogue will ever be reopened in those years. But they kept it. They kept it in the underground. Some of them told their children, and this was really risking their lives, that you're Jewish, let's bake matzah. So many Jews come up to us today when we distribute the matzah, and they tell these old Jews, which are 80 years old, 90 years old, and they tell us stories that they were little children standing in the kitchen. Of course, the windows were shut, closed, and like secretly, and they remember as kids standing there with their forks, making the holes in this dough and putting the matzah in the oven. So you're talking about Jews who kept the Jewish flame alive, risking their lives. So you mentioned Siberia. You can think that, thank God today, many, many communities that survived without a synagogue, without a Jewish school, without a Jewish center, just because the Jews kept their beliefs strong, notwithstanding all the hardships. That, I think, is really the beauty of Russian Jewry. I just want to mention one thing. I remember once Elie Wiesel came to Moscow, and he asked us a question. He said, how come from Spanish Jewry, after the Inquisition, there's nothing left? Very rarely, says, you'll find a Jew who's a grandson of a Marano Jews. And in Russia, you have so many Jews who kept the Judaism in hiding, and today it's coming out and so open and strong and still survived. So we don't have the answer how it happened. I think it's really, Russian Jews have a strong, I would say, a strong belief that even though it's cold and harsh and it's Siberia, they're still going to keep on pushing. These soldiers, 40 years in the army, and coming back and deciding they're going to build a synagogue. It shows a lot about the Jewish soul.
Chief Rabbi, I'm going to throw you a curveball, as they say in baseball. You know, some people say that Chabad sends shlichim all over the world to save Jewish souls, which you clearly do, even in places like Siberia. Others say that you're encouraging Jews to live all over the world in far-flung places and not come home to Israel. How do you respond to that criticism?
I got this curveball many years ago from actually somebody quite famous here in Israel, Arik Sharon. I'll tell you the story what happened. One day I got a phone call that he wants to see me. I flew specially to Israel, came to his office in Jerusalem. Actually, talking about Arik Sharon, his whole office was as big as a stage. And he had the Talmud in back of him, and that was practically the only books that he had in his room. It was really interesting to see in what kind of office the Prime Minister of Israel works. And for approximately an hour, he was just screaming at me and telling us that we are doing the wrong things. Not by saving these Jews, by opening Jewish schools, by opening synagogues, by opening community centers, by serving these Jews. He says, as long as you're going to serve them, they're not going to come to Israel. We need 1 million Russian Jews to come to Israel. And if they're not going to come, we're going to have an Arab majority in Israel. So your job is to close down all the schools, all the synagogues, all the centers, and get these Jews to come to Israel. And I told him at that time that I might agree with you, might disagree with you, but believe me, it's not going to work. The Jews are completely unaffiliated. They have no connection. How are we going to bring them to Israel? Just because you're going to snap your fingers and because there won't be a Jewish school, they'll completely assimilate. And I can't say that I convinced him. He didn't convince me. But years later, I remember the first time that the Israeli ambassador came to me and said, you know what? Chabad was right. And later the Sechnut came to us and said, you know what? Chabad was right. And that's when they started this program, Zehut Yehudit, Jewish identity. And everybody agreed that if you're not going to make them feel Jewish, they're not going to come to Israel. There was, a few years ago, they made a study of the Aliyah in the later years, and they said the Chabad was probably the strongest entity bringing Jews to Israel. We very strongly believe that the best place for a Jew is in Israel. But first he has to realize that he's a Jew. So we can tell them, you have to go to Israel, we'll print brochures, we'll, as they call it in Russia, propaganda, we'll close down the synagogues, the Jews are not going to come. If they'll feel Jewish, they'll come to Israel. Mr. Aminov, who just got a recognition here, he bought a house in Israel, his kids love Israel, his wife loves Israel, and thank God, I think what the Russian Jews, even those living in Russia, have done for Israel is amazing. We believe, and I always say that a Jew in Russia that doesn't feel extremely close to Israel, there's a problem in his Jewishness. There's no such a thing as a Jew that is Jewish but not connected to Israel. But to force people to come here, it's not going to happen. If we're going to make them feel good about who they are and they want to come to Israel, that's great. We cannot make them run away from Russia. They had enough of that. We have to make them feel good, and that should be their choice to come to Israel.
One of the interesting things you told me before was that in Russia, it's not like America, where you're either religious or secular, or even here in Israel. And it's not like the majority of the community is assimilating. The young people, lehefech, are the opposite, are marrying, rediscovering their Judaism and marrying into the faith. You yourself have 13 children?
Thank God.
Tell us how you've done this. I mean, it seems... not make the 13...
Let me call my wife.
How you've led this miracle of Jewish revival in Russia, where people are coming back to Judaism, where it's cool to wear a kippah, whereas in Europe, people are scared to wear a kippah.
Actually, I don't think it's my doing. I think it's, first of all, I think it's a miracle. I think it's everything that we see in Russia. It's hard to remember how it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago, but it's clearly a miracle. Nobody ever believed that Judaism in Russia will come back. If people that visited, and we have some people here, that visited Russia 30, 40 years ago, they said it's over. There's no future. You have some old Jews coming to the synagogue and that's it. I remember the first day I walked into the synagogue and somebody came over to me and said, you see these old people? You better watch over them. You better make them feel good because that's your community. And I looked around and I said, you know, thanks to me, the average age just dropped like by 20%. But I was the only young person there. There was no young people around. And today, I think that what has happened with the Iron Curtain falling, with the freedom of religion, with a president that is ready to come to a Jewish event, many different things. Again, the connection to Israel. Don't forget, probably every second Jew in Russia has some kind of family here in Israel. So people come to visit here. You'll see Russians in the streets, and just going over to them and telling them shalom, that's probably the best present you could do for them. They expect, many of them actually say that we come to Israel and we feel so Jewish, and all of a sudden we come here and the religious don't look at us because we are not religious enough. The Israelis don't look at us because we are Russians. And actually we are Jewish, that's all we are Jewish. That's what a regular Russian Jew feels. He feels he's Jewish. And because he's a Jew, he's just connected to any other Jew. In our community, there's no such a thing as labeling somebody religious, Sephardic, Hasidic. These labels are not there at all. It's one big family of Jews. And maybe sometimes here in Israel we get carried away with these differences, which I don't believe they even mean anything, because sometimes you have brothers and sisters who they love each other and they're different. So very often actually we see Israelis coming to Russia, to the synagogue, and we ask them, like, where do you go in Israel? They said, no, in Israel we don't go to the synagogue, because if we would go to Israel, to a synagogue in Israel, we are datiim, we are religious. When we come to synagogue here, it's because we are Jewish. And that's what actually Jews feel today in Russia. They feel Jewish. We never ask somebody, are you religious, are you not religious? People don't look at us as religious. They look at us as we are Jewish. I don't know how it happened. It's a blessing. It's really a special, unique community. We love each other, and we don't think about the differences. We think, maybe because we are in such a place, maybe because we realized how hard it was for the previous generation to be able to come to a synagogue and just say, I'm Jewish. So maybe it's appreciated, and we don't think about these little nonsense issues about religious, non-religious. That really doesn't count.
One more tough question before I open it up to the audience and ask you for a Pesach message. Yeah, a big, as you know, issue on the international stage today is America accusing Russia of interfering in its elections. And in response, President Putin, in an NBC interview, I believe, said that he was definitely not involved, and perhaps it could even be the Jews. Some of us took that as an anti-Semitic comment. You didn't.
Actually, I'll say there were many different articles and printed and answers and explanations of what he really meant, what he didn't mean. I'll say something here. I hope it's not going to be quoted too much. But actually, I think that, first of all, when you tell Russians that you meddled in the elections, they take it as a compliment. They say, wow, we are able to decide who's going to be president in the States. We are really powerful. Now, if it's the Jews that did it, wow, the Jews are even more powerful than we thought. We knew that they're strong, but they can mastermind such a thing. So I really don't think that that was the message that President Putin was giving. He was saying that it could have been anyone. It could have been somebody Ukrainian, somebody with a green card, somebody as a Tatar, a Jew. He was just mentioning many different nationalities. I really don't think, from, again, 20 years of knowing Mr. Putin, that there's any anti-Semitic feelings by him whatsoever. I'll even say, sometimes there was actually an interview not too long ago when they asked him, what do you say about, Russia meddling in America? And he says, it reminds me of all these anti-Semites. When something goes wrong, they blame the Jews. He says, the truth is that they are good for nothing. They don't know how to do anything. So they are losers. And that's why they have to blame someone, so they're going to blame the Jews. He said that's the way they feel. Something is going wrong in America, so you're going to blame the Russians. It's like, so really, it's not, I really don't think it was in any way meant derogatory towards the Jews. Some people in Russia might even say that it's a compliment for the Jews. I don't agree with that. But did Russia meddle in the elections? I don't know. I surely didn't. So.
I know, Chief Rabbi, that you have to be out of here by 10 o'clock, and we will keep that promise. But what is your message as we approach Passover, Pesach, to this audience here in Jerusalem?
I think, again, as I mentioned before, Russian Jews understand what it means to leave Egypt. Mitzrayim is not only a country. It's not only our next door neighbor. It's a state of mind. It's an attitude. It's, as we say, mitzarim ugvulim. It could be fear. It could be jealousy. It could be anything that doesn't let us open up and express ourselves in the right way within ourselves, or to really realize who we are. And when a person realizes how free he is and how much he really has to give others and how much he really doesn't have to fear of all these difficulties around him or jealousy, that's really leaving Mitzrayim. That's really leaving slavery. Today you could be a slave to a mobile phone, you could be a slave to your job, you could be a slave to anything around you. So really it's about feeling free to express yourself, to open up your potential and do what you really believe is right. Very often we do things because people around us think that that's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. Very often we do things because that's cool or that's accepted. I think that really coming out of your own shell and saying and realizing who I am and how much positive power I have inside of me and how much I can achieve is really leaving Mitzrayim. I just mentioned before, sometimes just going over to another person in the street and saying shalom, sometimes it's really coming out of Mitzrayim. It's really about hugging another Jew, hugging another person, helping somebody else, just breaking these barriers, breaking these stigmas, labels, again, religious, non-religious. Of course it's important to observe and learn and do, but how are we going to help another Jew if we're going to always put these walls between us? The goal is really to open up and come out and live a real, fulfilling life.
Well, I think you'll agree with me that this has been a really inspirational interview, at least for me. Thank you, Chief Rabbi. The Chief Rabbi has agreed to take questions, but please let me stress, we don't want to hear other people giving a drasha. Please don't give a speech. A short question to the Chief Rabbi, a respectful question, and we'll take a few. There are mics on either side of the audience, I believe. So let's take the first one from here in the middle.
Chief Rabbi, do you think that it's possible that the reason that Jews in Russia have overcome the past because of the example set by the Rebbe when he was in prison and he came out and he didn't lose his faith and he in fact spread his faith? Do you think that that has any kind of influence on the Jews of Russia today?
I'll try to answer. I really don't know what set the example. I believe a lot of Jewish leaders that stood up and were strong. We mentioned before Natan Sharansky, Yuli Edelstein, and many others who stood up because of their belief. I think anybody that is ready to give up comfort and maybe even risking their lives because of what they believe are the strongest example for anyone to live a real life. So no question that the in those days when the previous Rebbe was arrested and everybody realized that there's no hope and he still went till the end. I'm sure that at that time he saved Russian Jewry from giving up. But I think there were many, many other leaders who helped one way or other to keep the spirit alive. I want to stress again, I do believe this is the DNA of a Russian Jew. Russian Jews don't give up. They're really ready to fight till the end if they believe in something. And there's a lot that we can learn from them.
And I believe there's a microphone up there in left field. Someone has a question?
I got the impression from your talk, Rabbi, that there's a marked difference between the revival of Judaism among Jews in Russia as opposed to here. Common wisdom is that this revival has not taken place as yet, to the point where sometimes it's difficult to distinguish a Russian Jew from a non-Jew. Do you have any suggestions of how this kind of Jewish revival in Israel among Jews, among Russian Jews, could be attained?
I think number one, since we are coming into Pesach, is we should open our homes. I'm positive that probably a big percentage of Russian Jews living in Israel were never invited to a Seder. Just to take an example. And if each one of us, I remember the days when we used to have an empty chair by the Seder table for the Russian Jew, let's fill up that chair. Let's invite a Jewish family, Russian Jewish family, to see a Seder by us. Trust me, this will build a special friendship. They'll be thankful for you for life, and we'll come back. And it's going to be the best experience for your family, for your kids, to see a family that never participated in a Seder, seeing a real Seder. And I think that it could be done in many ways. It could be a Shabbat. It could be, bringing him matzah to his house and making him feel that he's wanted here in Israel and we love him. I believe that, sadly, many Russian Jews came to Israel. They wanted to be part of tradition and everything, and they felt that they didn't belong in these already organized synagogues or whatever, and they sort of gave up. Could be I'm wrong. It's very hard for me to judge. First of all, I think that in Israel there's an incredible revival of everything, so I don't want to in any way judge non-favorably. But if you ask me what else could be done, I think Russian Jews have a tendency to still live in their ghettos. They still live within themselves. This wall has to come down, and we have to make them feel part of society. Very often the second generation feels much more at home. But I do believe that if we're going to open up our homes, many more are going to come in.
Well, what a great answer. The question right in the back there, gentlemen.
Kvod Harav, I'd like to know what the Federation will be doing for Jews who will come to the World Cup soccer games. And I'd also like to ask you, in Sochi, I went to look for Chabad, and I went to look for Rabbi Idol Kop at the Confederation Cup. And I couldn't find Chabad. And the neighbors were petrified when I asked, and I understood that Putin deported Rabbi Idol Kop, who is a friend of yours. Could you explain to us what is happening in Sochi? Why is there no Chabad in Sochi today?
Great question. Number one about the World Cup. So first of all, we're going to cheer for Israel. I would love Italy to win, but they didn't even make it to the game. So what we're going to have is, first of all, we'll have kosher food available in all the cities where the games are going to take place. We'll have Shabbat open for any visitor or fan coming to the World Cup. We're going to have Shabbat meals in every city where there is going to be games. And of course, services for any tourists coming, we'll be more than happy to help them and welcoming them. What happened in Sochi, sadly, it's a very, very sad story. Rabbi Idol Kop is a very, very close friend of mine, and I must say that I'll be open. I met with President Putin when this whole story was going on, and he was being sent away with crazy absurd accusations that he was spying, or I don't remember the words exactly that were being used. And I came to him, and I must say President Putin himself was shocked when he heard of what was going on, and he said he's going to look into it and get back to us. Sadly, the FSB, which is today's KGB, they are very active today in Russia. And what they say to us when we ask them, what's the matter? Like, we know for sure that this is not a danger for Russia. To keep Rabbi Edelkop there, he's loved. Everybody loved him. He built a beautiful community. He's doing great work. Can you just at least explain to us what's the reason that you don't want him here? And they say, listen, if you would go to the CIA and you would ask the same question, you wouldn't get an answer. If you'd go to the Mossad, you wouldn't get an answer. We don't owe you an answer. Sadly, we're dealing with an organization that we have still today, we have no clue why they felt that Mr. Rabbi Edelkop should be sent away. I think it's bad for Russia. It's bad for the Jewish community in Russia. We try to do whatever we can. Sadly, we failed. So what can I tell you? You win, and sometimes you win some games, and sometimes you lose some. With Rabbi Edelkop, we lost a big game. We hope very soon we'll find another rabbi to replace him. I doubt that somebody will be as good as him, but we'll try our best. One thing I could tell you, and I'll be open, Russia believes today that we should have as many as possible of local rabbis trained in Russia, born in Russia. We don't need to import American rabbis to Russia. It has probably to do also with the American-Russian relationship. I have no idea how rabbis became part of this equation, but that's more or less the story.
You have energy for a couple more? So one on the top there.
Rabbi, you mentioned that you visited Tomsk. I'm just wondering if you had a chance to visit Birobidzhan. Is that still in existence, or there are no Jews there anymore, or is it still, do they still have Jews over there?
So Birobidzhan is still there, and there are, thank God, many less Jews than they were at the height of when Stalin decided to send the Jews to this Jewish autonomous region. At the end of Russia, it's in the Far East, near China. It's a city that was built practically on swamps. It's a very tough place to live there. In the winter, it's harshly cold. In the summer, it's unbearably hot. And probably Stalin decided to take revenge on the Jews and decided he's going to send them to such a beautiful place. So the plan was actually to send all the Jews of Russia to Birobidzhan. Thank God it didn't happen. But those that ended up there, when the doors to Israel opened up, many, many of them came to Israel. Today there are probably, I would say, 7,000 to 10,000 Jews living in Birobidzhan. We'll be visiting Birobidzhan actually in a few months to open up for the first time in history a mikveh built in Birobidzhan. Actually, again, Mr. Aminov, who's sitting here today, is one of the sponsors of this project. So it's a, thank God we opened a synagogue there, a community center, a kindergarten. The rabbi in Birobidzhan, Rabbi Eli Riz, was actually born in Birobidzhan, and he learned in yeshiva here in Israel, and he went back to be the shaliach there. And there's amazing activities in the Jewish community. You have to understand the whole city is really Jewish. Jewish in not exactly the way we understand Jewish, but everything is written in Yiddish letters. Of course, you know, all the symbols in the cities are menorahs and Magen David and everything. The main street is not Lenin Street, but Shalom Aleichem Street, and so on and so forth. So it's an interesting place to live because the non-Jews actually are living in a Jewish autonomous region, and they feel probably more Jewish than many other Jews. We just opened up a kosher restaurant there, which is also a first. So I would say the Jewish life there is actually thriving, but there aren't so many Jews there. So I don't think there's an amazing future there, but there's a lot of activities.
It just brings me back to the question I did ask you earlier, which I'd like to hear a little bit more about, is that you're opening a Jewish university in Moscow, apparently based on the yeshiva college model?
So actually, we do understand that not every boy and girl will go to a yeshiva or to a religious school, so we're giving an opportunity for young boys and girls to get a secular education, at the same time also learning some Jewish studies. We have a school, a university for girls, we have for boys. Now we are embarking in making this a big, big project. Actually, it's in connection with Touro College, who's helped us a lot. Boys and girls that learn in this university, they get also an American degree, which hopefully is going to help them in the future. So thank God we see today, first of all, this idea of establishing such an open university and such a level is actually coming with full support from the government. At the same time that the government is closing down many small universities and trying to get as many large universities to sort of combine and become big universities, they still believe that we should have a Jewish university. So we're very thankful to them, and we hope there's going to be a successful project.
When does it officially open?
I mean, it's going to open officially in 2 months, but the real opening is going to be in September.
Okay. One more question here. We can just see a hand. It's not easy.
Chief Rabbi, thank you so much for your very inspiring talk. But I was very interested in what you said about 40 years ago when people visited Russia. They thought that was the end. There'd be no revival. I was one of the many people privileged to visit Russia about 40 years ago as quite a young person. And I never felt that at all. I always felt that from their thirst for knowledge and Yahadut and everything else, it was just such a privilege teaching them. I mean, there were many clandestine lessons that we gave. And I was quite surprised that you said this. I want to know what made you say it, because I know when Natan Sharansky came to visit JFS School, which is a large comprehensive school in England, he always said, that we were always alive and kicking. And that's what I felt.
Okay, so I'm not sure where you visited.
I was a bit shocked. I visited Moscow, and I visited about 12 to 15 families. Very good. So I want to tell you. Through Ernie Hirsch, I have to tell you, there were a lot of people in England who really, in the 35.
So first of all, I visited Russia in '87 when things were already getting better, and I saw the reality on the ground. Now, I do agree with you that there were some people, you mentioned Natan Sharansky, and there were many, many more. I would say probably if you get everybody together, there were a few hundred people throughout the whole Russia, from the Soviet Union, they were active in the underground. Now, everybody understood, number one, that as soon as the doors are going to open up, or they're going to let them go, they're going to run out. And those hundreds of thousands that stayed back are going to be lost. That's number one. Number two, Russia is not Moscow. Today you have over 200 communities in Russia. You mentioned Tomsk, and that's what I mentioned about. In a city like Tomsk, where there was no synagogue, no rabbi, no nothing, the Jews should remain Jews, and today you have a thriving communities. It's a miracle. If you ask me, I have no idea how that happened. It didn't happen because of Natan Sharansky sitting in Moscow, or somebody else sitting in Odessa or Kiev. Altogether, in the whole former Soviet Union, you had probably 7, 8 synagogues. Today, you're talking about hundreds of synagogues, thousands and thousands of people that came out and they said, we are Jewish. In 1993, just to give you an idea, somebody came over to the Jewish community in Moscow and said, I want to build a synagogue. And people told him, are you crazy? Our synagogues are empty. There's nobody here. Whoever was Jewish left. There's nothing left. So, of course, there were, again, I mentioned before, Russian Jews, if you ask me, are the strongest and the believers that, nothing is going to extinguish their belief. But most of them didn't even know that they were Jewish. Today, you're talking about a community which is, thank God, 100,000 strong. I mentioned before the amount of matzah that we bake. Every month, there's over 50 tons of kosher meat being sold in Moscow. So these are big numbers of Jews that if you ask them, where were you 20 years ago? Let me just turn to Mr. Aminov, just because he's here. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, he practically didn't even know that he was Jewish. Today he has a beautiful family, 6 children, keeps Shabbat, puts on 2 pairs of tefillin every day, on and on. And such people, thank God, is the people in our community. Where did they come out from? When they were children, they grew up, they didn't even know that they were Jewish. Their parents didn't even think that it's important to tell them that they were Jewish. So some people knew somewhere that they were Jewish. Again, if you're talking about would Judaism survive in Russia, yes. Would hundreds of thousands of Jews come out and say, I'm Jewish? I don't think anybody believed that. I could even tell you stories of people that felt that there's no point of, keeping Sefer Torahs there or books or anything because there's nobody's going to read them tomorrow. Today, practically twice a month, we have a new Sefer Torah being brought to Russia to a different synagogue. And I do think that a lot of it is thanks to people who helped in those years, to the local Russians who kept the flame alive, and many, many Jewish organizations that helped materially, spiritually, physically, by visiting, by helping, by sending food, parcels, books, and everything. That's what kept the Yiddishkeit alive. But I don't think anybody in their best dream, best scenario, believed that it's going to be as good as it is today. I think if you were there 40 years ago, I think you should come back to visit and see what's going on.
Okay, one last question. Where's the mic?
Chief Rabbi, my name is like first name of Putin, so my name is Vladimir. And
Очень приятно.
Мне тоже. And so I want to ask you a tough question. You spoke about Syria, and I pretty much agree. Yes, so maybe Assad is better than IDIL and others. But what can you say about relationships between Russia and Iran, that are our worst enemy, maybe?
I think Iran is an enemy to Iran itself, if you ask me. And of course, their enemies is any other country around the world. I would say many in the Arab world also feel that Iran is not going in the right direction. Question is what to do with Iran. So again, I'm not a politician and I'm not a spokesman for Mr. Putin. So I don't know exactly what is the best way to deal with Iran. Is it sanctions? Is it figuring out how to control them, putting sense into their heads and making them understand that they're fighting a war that has no purpose and no mean, nothing's going to come out of it. So I do believe that Russia has some kind of dialogue with Iran, and they're trying to find a way to make them understand that they have to find a solution, whether it's in Syria, whether it's with the border of Russia, and many other issues that are being dealt with Iran. I think that it's important, first of all, Israel has all the right to defend itself, and I think that Mr. Putin understands that fully, whether it's in Syria, and the same is with Iran, hostility towards Israel. What to do with Iran? I don't have a solution. I think that if there would be a combined effort of most countries in the world that understand that Iran could be a danger to itself and to the rest of the world, maybe we'll get somewhere. And I think that there has to be some kind of way of understanding to finding a common solution that is going to, again, somehow control the situation there. Right now, it's dangerous, I think, for the whole Middle East, for Iran, and for Russia also. So I do hope that a solution will be found. Do I deal with Iran? No. Do I tell Putin what to do with Iran? Also not. I do know that every time that Bibi Netanyahu meets with President Putin, this issue is on the table. And we're trying to help that the relation between Israel and Russia should be even stronger, and I hope that's going to help for the security of Israel also.
I'd like to just end on a high note. So let me ask you just a personal story, because I know you know it. But President Putin bought an apartment in Tel Aviv for his German teacher to thank her because he appreciated her, and then met her when he came to Israel. There have been reports in the press that when she died last year, she left it to President Putin.
So I'll just tell you the story the way I know it. When President Putin visited Israel, actually there was a surprise encounter between the two of them, and all of a sudden they saw each other and they hugged and they kissed and they were all over each other. And at a certain point, President Putin turned to her and he said, how can I help you? Thank God now I have a way to help. When I was a kid, you helped me. How can I pay back for what you did for me? How can I help you? And she said, if you can take care of one big problem, my neighbors that live above me constantly are flooding my apartment. Can you please make sure that this should stop? And I remember him telling me the story, and he was just laughing, and he says, it's like the story of the soldier that asks to be moved to a different... anyways, to make a long story short, he bought her an apartment, and a while ago, she asked that she wants to transfer the ownership back to him, to a Jewish organization in Russia. She wants that somehow this, when she's going to pass away, when she's going to die, that the apartment should go back to Russia. And Putin was actually strongly against it. He said, no, this was bought for somebody that lives in Israel. This has to stay in Israel. We don't want ownership of that apartment. It was a present given to somebody that lives in Israel. Let Israel decide what's going to be with the apartment. What's going on there today, I don't know. I didn't really follow the story. But I do think that he was proud of his teacher, and he was proud that she was Jewish, and he was very, very thankful to her. He always asked, how is she doing? How's their health? And does she need anything? And I think it does show a certain care. This wasn't publicized before. It just happened. The story came out now when she passed away. But I do think that he has a certain personal connection with people that he feels now that have helped him in the past.
I think her name was Mina Berlina, and I'm sure he has a special connection with you, and we've all seen why tonight. Chief Rabbi Berel Lazar, thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you. Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Happy and kosher Pesach. And as we say, L'Shana Haba b'Yerushalayim, let's hope that this year we'll all celebrate in Yerushalayim with Mashiach. Shana Tova.